Hey everybody, so this is a tutorial on how to make materials blink. It's going to be really quick and straightforward, but I'm just going to run through some really easy ways to manage blink. But because it's a game engine, there's like a million ways to skin any cat. So I'm going to show you three different methods, and from these three different methods you can kind of springboard into lots of different ways. So you can apply this to pretty much anything on a material. And it'll give you a good foundation for the material system in general. So without further ado, let's jump into this. So as you can see here, we have three different materials blinking. This last one blinks on click. So if I were to go ahead and hit play, just give it a second to load. Okay, and if I click, it's doing the blink. So the first one is a slow oscillation blink. The second one is an on-off blink. And the third one is pretty much, it could be either one of the two, or it could be anything you want. This one we're just controlling programmatically. So this one and this one are handled through the material without any input from the user. And as you can see, they automatically work even in the editor, right? Whereas this one requires the game to be played for it to fire. Because it's actually using game logic to trigger the blink. Okay, so three different methods. The first two are very similar. The third one's a little bit different, but effectively we're going to do three different styles of blink. Okay, so let's jump into the first one. And we're just going to look at the material on this guy, because that's really all that's happening, is we're just affecting the material. Now, the first thing you may notice is this is very different from the standard material. It isn't really, okay? What I've done is I've just basically simplified the shader to be able to look at only the main part that we're caring about, okay? So all I've done is I've plugged the base color directly into the base color, world normal into the normal, metallic into the metallic, and roughness into the roughness. So I've just made a very basic shader to really simplify the process. It's always good to do this too. So the standard shader in Stingray is very comfortable to work with because it has a lot of functionality that you can really make it do kind of what you want. You can make it use a color map, you can make it use a material, or you can just give it a color, or you can do lots of different things with it. The drawback is it's extremely non-performant. So sometimes you want to make your materials more performant. So this is something to pay attention to in a general respect as well. If you can, it's always best to reduce the number of nodes to make it so that you're just dealing with what you want to deal with. In this case, all I wanted was a blinking light, and I don't really need a texture map, so I don't need to, I don't need to do a lot of things. So I'm just piping the main parts that I care about into each of the respective locations. Okay, so don't be weirded out by the fact that this shader is so simple. It's good, right? It's good to make things simple. So anyway, the part that we care about is going to be this string right here, okay? So let's take a look at what's going on here. Now, again, we wanted it to blink, and what's happening is it's slowly oscillating over time. So it's, off, on, okay? Some other really basic things that I just should cover before I get too deep into this. We have a blink speed. We have any of these red guys, right? These are all what are called material inputs, okay? And each of these material inputs are going to have parameters over here on the right. So if you look in your property editor, if you maximize it, you might not notice them, okay? But they're really important, so don't maximize this window. You will see that as you select each of these things, like if I just select the background, I get the controls for this whole entire shader. But if I select individual parts, I get the details for that specific node that I'm touching, okay? So here I've touched base color, so I can see that I've got base color, base color, base color, right? So this right here applies to this, okay? So if I were to change this node name to base color node, we would see that the node itself changes its name. But down here, where is base color? Base color, where are you? Oh yeah, that's right, I have to actually select it. So now I'm looking at the shader, right? So we would see that base color is here, okay? So that's responding to this display name, okay? So if I were to say base color display, we would see that now this says base color display, okay? So I don't want to do that actually. I just want to leave them all base color. I guess this one's fine. I'll leave it as base color node. It doesn't matter. And then this last one, this one's really important when you want to do the third part, right? When we do this green one, this is going to be really important because this is what you're using to call it via any kind of like Lua or scripting or flow nodes, okay? So this is the naming convention that you use to programmatically call that node, okay? So that's really important, okay, that last one. These two are just kind of display informations, okay? That they're relatively unimportant, except for organization. Anyway, so that's that. So again, these are nodes that you create, and you just create those by going add, input, and we're looking for material variable. Okay, that'll create one of these, and they have some basic functions that you can change in them. Okay, you can change them to scalar, which is now just it'll give you this green output, which means that what scalar is a fancy term for saying it's only one number. Okay, this one's a vector because it's got 3 different numbers. Okay, so you have a couple different choices. Those are pretty much the 2 that I always use. Every once in a while I'll use the other ones, but for the most part I almost always use just scalar and vector 3. Vector 4 would be if you wanted to also include an alpha, or it's basically a vector with 4 channels, and the vector 2 is a vector with 2 channels. Okay, so in general though, you're pretty much going to be working with these 2, unless you're doing special case kind of things. All right, so and the scalar is the most common by far. So yeah, okay, cool. So let's get into the actual function. Okay, so the function itself is really simple. What we're basically doing is we're going to be using a sine wave, in this case a cosine wave, and all we're doing is we're going to be oscillating that sine wave over time. Okay, so the important part is to bring in this time function. Okay, that's going to give us a constant increasing number, and the way that the cosine function works, it'll basically give us a return from -1 to 1, -1 to 1, and then back down to -1, and it'll be a slow gradient from -1 to 1 to -1. Okay, so what we're doing is we've got a couple basic things that we're just getting fancy with. Okay, this right here is going to control our speed. Okay, and by doing this, what we're basically doing is multiplying the time by a number. Okay, so if it was 1 and we make it a number of 2, so it's going to be 2, so this is just happening faster, right? This cosine function is getting run quicker, okay, because the numbers are increasing much more rapidly. So every time this increases, we're just multiplying it by a greater value or a lesser value, so that we're either increasing the amount of that number that comes out of time, or we're decreasing that number that comes out of time. Either way, the end result is that we're going to be making this value either greater or smaller with every time the time clicks off. Okay, so cosine will run faster or slower based off this blink speed, and how that'll happen is just this number will either be increased or decreased. And as you can see, if I click blink speed, I've basically got a value of 0 to 100, and that will allow me to increase and decrease my speed. All right, so, and that's the min and the max. And one other thing that's nice to know is these have different ways of being represented. I like the number slider. It just works really nicely, and that's these guys. These are number sliders, right? So if I go in here right now, I can actually adjust my blink speed to be faster, right? So now I've got a really fast blink speed, okay? So, or I can reduce it and make it a really slow blink speed. Anything below 1 is going to get really, really slow, okay? So it's going to get real slow. And that's how that works, okay? So that's your blink speed. And again, that's just multiplying the blink speed. It's just a scalar value versus the time, okay? And we're going to then plug that into the cosine function. And then what we're going to do is we're going to add it to 1, okay? We're going to add 1 to the value. And there's a reason why we're adding 1 to the value. Remember before I said that the cosine is going to give us a value from -1 to 1 and then back down to -1. Well, for something like an emissive quality, we don't really want negative values. So what we're doing is we're basically just moving the sine wave up to the 0 value. So the bottom of this cosine function is now going to be returning to a maximum of 0. So if it was before -1 to 1 to -1, it's now going to be 0 to 2 to negative, I'm sorry, 0 to 2 to 0. So that's the way the function is going to run now. So yeah, we can even, if we wanted to be really fancy about it, we could even put a multiplier in here to make it times 0.5 so that it's going from 0 to 1 to 0. Okay, but we don't want to do that. We actually want to be able to overdrive that value. So forget that last thing that I said. That's just a way that you can keep it in the range of 0 to 1 if you wanted to do that. We don't care about that in this function. We want it to actually get brighter than 1. Okay, so what we're doing is we're actually multiplying it by an emissive intensity. And this guy I have set from 0 to 100. It's probably overkill. We could probably set this to more like 20, and that would be more than enough. The drawback, excuse me, the drawback of going to very high driving values is it becomes very hard to use your little slider, right? Because if this is going from such high values, that range, these become really hard to pinpoint because you've got such a large range inside of this short slider. So in general I try not to put numbers that are too great, okay? Because like if I make this 100, or let's say 1,000, right? Let's say I made it 1,000, which is really overkill, right? When I go into my slider now, like trying to find, let's say I wanted to hit 4, right? Like how do I hit 4? Like that's going to be really, really hard to find 4 in here. Whereas if I set this value to something more common like, 20, we'll see that it's a lot easier to hit that 4 number, right? So I can get to that 4 a lot easier. It just makes this a lot more accurate, okay? So anyway, so we're taking the cosine, which is, again, a wave from -1 to 1. I'm sorry, -1 to 1 to -1. We're adding 1 to it, so it's now going from 0 to 2 to 0. We're going to multiply that by the emissive intensity, whatever we set it to, and then we're going to multiply that by the color, okay? So basically what that's doing is this vector, or this vector 3, is coming out with a color value. So each of the parts of the color value are going to be multiplied by whatever this output is, okay? So whatever our current output of this multiply is going to be, it's going to be multiplied across that. And since it's a vector, it's actually going to apply it to all 3 of the outputs of this RGB. So each one is going to be incremented higher based off of this number. And since there's only one of these coming in, they're all going to be multiplied against that same value. Okay, so they'll all increase equally to it. Okay, so and then we're just plugging that into the emissive. So that's really all we have to do to make a blinking material, and that's pretty straightforward. So it seems complicated, but what I would do is I would actually take a screenshot of this or pause the video and replicate this. Okay, it's pretty much a straightforward operation, and once you kind of understand it, you'll be using this all the time. This is a really useful function, and you can use this same kind of concept for lots of different things. You could use it for, let's say you wanted a ball bobbing in the water, right? Like you could apply this output right here to, so basically all of this, you would want to just apply that in your inside a level flow or unit flow. You could pretty much build out this exact same thing using a cosine, and you could now make it so that your ball bobs in the water, right? So you're just applying it to the z value, let's say, of a model, okay? So just a very useful function. You'll find tons of uses for the cosine function. Very, very useful. And here we're just using it to control the blinking rate, okay? And again, that gives us a nice smooth curve. Effectively what we're doing is we're graphing a wave, okay? So that's that. So that's this this smooth gradient blink function, okay? So now we're going to look at the next one on the list, which is going to be this very simple on or off, okay? And it's going to be extremely similar to the one that we just used, okay? So let's look at that guy, and let's see what we're doing here. Okay, so again, we're using the cosine function. We're going to be doing exactly the same thing. We're taking the blink speed and the time. We're doing a multiply. We're doing the cosine. We're adding 1 to it. So exactly the same up to this part is the same. Okay, then here we're doing something a little bit different. Okay, what we're doing is we're doing an if statement. Okay, and the if statement is checking to see if it's above 1 or below 1. Okay, so as you can see, this is coming in, and remember I said that this goes from 0 to 1 to 0. I'm sorry, 0 to 2 to 0. So if A is greater than 1, right, and if you check the if statement, you'll see that I've set it to greater. You can actually set this to do a bunch of different things. We're going to leave it set to greater. So if it's greater than 1, then it's going to do blink intensity, right? So blink intensity is just an input. And if it's less than 1, then it's going to be false, right? Because A is not greater than B. So it's going to return false. And you'll have blink off intensity, okay? So if we look at our shader, I have blink intensity and blink off intensity. And here we can just set it to, if we wanted it to, while it's blinking on, it's going to be 10 intensity. And while it's off, it'll be 2 intensity, right? And now it'll actually look just like that. So now you can't really see it changing because pretty much anything over 1 is pretty much blinking. It's just how much is it blinking. So if I set that back down to 0, you'll see that it's blinking on and off and on and off. Okay, so basically the same exact thing. We're just testing, is it above 1 or below 1? If it's above 1, we're just setting a solid value. If it's below 1, we're setting a solid value. Okay, so nothing complicated there. And then from that, we're doing the same thing. We're going to multiply the output of this guy into our base color and plugging that into the emissive channel. And that's really it. Okay, so that's that. It's really straightforward. Once you understand this guy, you'll realize how much you can do with it. Okay, so definitely put that in your little bank of cool things to do. All right, so cool. All right, next thing is the more fun one, and the one that I actually end up using more often than anything else. Generally speaking, I want to have control over when something blinks. And though these are useful for something that's very simple, that's just going to do its own thing and I never have to worry about it, that's great, right? But if I want to have programmatical control, then I need a different way of handling this, okay? So let's take a look at the material first. And let's see what we're doing. So here in the material, I've made it extremely simple, okay? This is actually the most simple material-wise of the group, okay? And all we're really doing is we've got this blink intensity node, and we're just plugging in that value, okay? And we have a min and a max, okay? We can set that max to whatever we want, again, just as we did. But we're basically just plugging a value into the multiply node, so that we're just cutting off all that stuff that was on the left. And the reason that we're cutting off all that stuff from the left is because we want to supply this from code, okay? So let's take a look at what that means. So I'm not going to close this, I'm just going to minimize it. And I'm going to go into the sphere unit, and I'm going to take a look at its unit flow, okay? And here we're setting those values through this intensity and through this material variable, okay? So what we're doing is we're basically going to be supplying this material variable with this variable, okay? And that sounds complicated, and I'm trying to think of a better way to explain that. So all I'm doing is I'm setting a variable each time, okay? So if I press the mouse button, if it's even, I'm going to set it to 5. If it's odd, I'm going to set it to 0. That value then gets called from here. See, intensity and intensity. So I'm setting I'm setting the same value with either a 5 or a 0. And then I'm pulling that value from here. So maybe this would be an easier way to see it, so you don't think that these are so necessarily connected, right? So, and then this is just the output saying trigger it, right? So anytime you see one of these gray lines, that's basically like saying fire, right? Like make it happen. So when I press it, it says fire this toggle. Then the toggle says, okay, am I even or am I odd? Okay, well, I'm even this time, so I'm going to fire the top. And if I'm odd, then I'm going to fire the bottom, right? So then it says, okay, well, I've been fired, so I want my intensity to equal 0, right? So then that gets done, and then it says, okay, well, fire out again. And now it says, okay, well, set the material variable, right? And then the material variable says, well, I need some parameters for that. Okay, well, what am I affecting, right? I'm going to be using this mesh. I'm going to be using this material, and I'm going to be setting the intensity to 1. I'm sorry, to whatever. It's not going to be setting it to 1. It's going to be setting it to whatever intensity was set to. So if it was set to 0, it's going to now be 0. If we fire the top, if let's say it resulted in even, now toggle always will just go back and forth. It'll go even, then odd, then even, then odd every time it's fired. Okay, so so this time it's been fired and it's going to say even. So numeric of 5 is going to be fired. It's now setting intensity equal to 5, and that's going to fire out. It's going to come back to the same thing. It's going to say, okay, what material am I using? Okay, well, I'm using the same exact material as I have been. And what is my value? Well, my value is whatever intensity was set to. This time it was set to 5. So fill that variable with 5. That gets pulled into, oops, that gets pulled into this blink intensity node and gets fired from the multiply. Okay, so now this is being filled with 5. Okay, so does that, hopefully that makes sense. Now the beauty of this is we're looking at a very simple method of setting this number, but you can set this number any way you want. You could literally do exactly what we're doing here. I'm sorry, not that. Let's look at this one, right? We could do all this stuff, you know, in that flow area, right? Like we have all those same functions in here. So if we wanted to, we could actually go, you know, math and sine wave and, you know, numeric, and grab the sine wave or the cosine wave. I know it's in here somewhere. I don't see it though. Where is it? Well, we could use the sine wave, same thing. It's really just the inverse of this cosine wave. But there should be cosine in here. I don't know why I'm not seeing it. Anyway, but theoretically you could make it just as complicated in here, right? So, but now you could control all that stuff programmatically and it wouldn't just be fixed. Okay, so in the material, you're basically saying I always want it to blink this rate. Okay, unless you were to set it in your material values, but it's still a set function, right? Like it's always going to fire at that rate. Once the game starts, it's always going to be that. Whereas this, you can adjust all of this stuff by code, or by level flow or unit flow. So you have a lot more control during the gameplay in here. And this is just one example where I'm using the mouse button to toggle. Okay, so so hopefully that kind of clears up how to make your materials work in different fashions. And it's a pretty good little way of seeing that, oh, I can do things in the materials, or I can do things in the unit flow or in the level flow. So it just shows you that you have some powers that you may not have realized were there. So yeah, so that's going to pretty much conclude this tutorial. If you have any questions, or if I wasn't clear on anything, please say so in the comments. I'll monitor this. So yeah, if you liked this video, please do like the video, and hopefully this was helpful. All right, cool. Talk to you soon. Bye.